Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Horobin, and I'm head of the Faculty of English. And it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce the News UK Visiting Professor of Creative Media, Sir Stephen Fry. It's a particular delight to me that Stephen has chosen to speak about language tonight, since I've long admired his extensive and learned contributions to this field. His 5-part TV documentary, Planet Word, which ranged from the origins of language to language death, from Shakespeare to hip-hop and Klingon. His radio programme, Fry's English Delight, ran to an extraordinary 10 series, with such inviting titles as English Upside Down, Words Fail Me, and Accentuate the Negative. It was with excitement and some trepidation that I appeared in an episode called Capital Punishment. Thankfully, it turned out to be about capital letters. For years, I've used a sketch from the show A Bit of Fry and Laurie for my introduction to language lectures. The reason I use this is because it's so well informed, drawing on Saussure's distinction between langue, the language system, and parole, the actual utterance, and Chomsky's conception of language as a finite system that can generate an infinite number of grammatical statements. The other reason I use it is because Stephen has a rare gift of being able to make that subject funny. Much funnier than I can, funnier even than Saussure or Chomsky. Stephen's interest in language goes back to one of his early comic characters, Donald Trefusis, the professor of philology, the study of language, at Cambridge University. Trefusis contributed a series of entertaining essays to the BBC Radio 4 programme Loose Ends, opining forcefully on topics such as dictionaries. You can't collect, mount and stuff words and hang them like trophies, he says. Or artificial languages. Languages are like towns. They must grow organically. We will pass silently over the one titled On Hating Oxford. Trefusis also featured in Stephen's first novel, The Liar, as tutor to Adrian Healy, in which they discuss Adrian's essays on the origin of the periphrastic do construction in English. And what struck me reading this is how informed the essay is in proposing several cogent and entirely plausible theories, though regrettably, Stephen never tells us which one he favours. In addition to his expert knowledge of the subject, Stephen is also a philologist in the etymological sense, that is, a lover of words. You can see that in the sketch I mentioned earlier, the way it plays with sounds and meanings, engaging in breathtaking flights of linguistic fancy, or simply exploiting the comedy in the sound of the word capable. You see, it's not funny when I say it, but it is when Stephen does. Much of his comedy is marked by a kind of linguistic anarchy, rejoicing in the flexibility and variety of the English language, its limitless potential for innovation, a disdain for the strictures of prescriptivism, and experimentation at the limits of language, like the baffling non sequiturs with which Trefusis signed off his essays, if you have been, then it was. Or the amount of meaning that Stephen could generate using just the single word indeed in Jeeves and Wooster, or just by raising his eyebrows. And those bizarre non-linguistic exclamations uttered by General Melchett in Blackadder Goes Forth, which I'm not even going to try to imitate. It's for these reasons I can think of no one better qualified to address us on the subject of words, 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 the lure of language. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our News UK Visiting Professor of Creative Media, Sir Stephen Fry.
Thank you, Simon. Wow. Well, thank you. Bless you, Simon. I had no idea I was so capable. Words, 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 indeed. Thank you all so much. This is an extraordinary honor for me. It's wonderful to stand here surrounded by this beautiful smile of Christopher Wren's and to be visiting professor of creative media. Given that language is my subject today, I suppose this grand job description needs to be interpreted, to be parsed and unpacked. Visiting professor. Well, it's lovely to be thought of as a professor and a spouser, but visiting. I have a suspicion that in Oxford terms, that's a cunning way of ensuring that I get no affiliation with a faculty, department, or most importantly, with a college. And you know what being detached in that way means. It means no dining rights. And in this town, most importantly, the most valuable rights of all are denied me. Parking rights. But creative media, if the ghosts of academics past and these old stones and panels around us could speak, what would they think of such a phrase, especially if we translate it into its more modern form? After all, creative media today is better known as, Lord preserve us, content, or, God help us, product. So perhaps I won't get too grand if I remind myself that it is as the News International detached espouser of content provision and product delivery that I address you today. In preparing this address, I considered many approaches. My life in show business has taught me that when presenting in public, whether through a camera, on a stage, behind a microphone, or at a lectern like this, the first consideration is, or should be, a sense of one's audience. Where do you come from? Of what stuff are you constituted? What are your hopes and expectations for the coming 50 or 55 minutes? What is your median age and demographic? Well, I don't actually stand in the wings very often chewing on words like median and demographic. That would be grotesque. But nonetheless, I must consider who you are likely to be and what you might expect of me. Why have you acquired a ticket? What would entertain you? What would disappoint you even? Or worst of all, which I know won't happen, what would prevent you at the finish from rising as one to cheer and stamp your feet and roar with crazed adoration? It's possible you consist largely of fellows, lecturers, and other tenured academics waiting to tut and hiss at my every error of fact or style, every unnecessary pleonasm, every far from elegant meiosis. That's really clever because unnecessary pleonasm is a pleonasm, and far from elegant is a meiosis or litotes. But you knew that. Should I imagine that I'm addressing students, under or postgraduates, for many of whom I am nothing but one more cursed old man with a resonant voice, just one more damned boomer. Or maybe, heaven preserve us, I have entirely to forget all of you here and proceed on the assumption that this event is to be YouTubed and TikToked and Insta'd into quotable shreds and memeable patches, forcing me to be so careful in my words that I am only left with banalities to trot out, lest I be cast into outer darkness. Usually, one doesn't trouble one's audience with all these fears, all these fancies. The tacit contract is that I disgorge in a manner suited to the occasion, and we take as read the unspoken truth of my anxiety, the anxiety of a speaker who hopes not to bore or offend or misfire, but also your anxiety, the anxiety of an audience that hopes not to be bored or insulted or disappointed. After all, this professorship is in the creative arts, and the creative arts are, undignified and overused as the word may be, performative. The question of audience is not unimportant, therefore. All the arts are ultimately performing arts. The creative artist is, one way or the other, whether they acknowledge it or not, a performer. Look at what I've made, they say. I've written this, I'm playing this, singing this, dancing this. I am the creator, you are the audience, the beholder, the viewer, the patron, the client, the customer, God help us everyone, the consumer. Look, listen, watch, attend, applaud, and above all, pay up. This is our bargain, and it's good whether I'm Dvorak, Dostoevsky, Dali, or Dua Lipa. When it comes to lectures in a university, the usual performance style is de haut en bas. The professor speaks from the grand height of knowledge, wisdom, and experience down to the grateful canaille below. In fact, the use of words like de haut en bas and canaille is a perfect example of precisely such an intolerable manner. We up there, you down below, though Christopher Wren ensured that most of you are actually up there, and I'm the one down below. Do you know how they refer to you in the senior common rooms and faculty offices of this university if you're a student? Do you know? Muggles. That's what they put. It's true. It's true, certainly here at least. They are the magical people. You are the muggles. Yeah, here at the University of Hogsford, or should that be Oxwarts? Anyway, very often for this kind of lecture, the dull old dignitary addressing the shiny young darlings ends up delivering a stream of motivational quotelets that are the living embodiment of those online digital postcards written in a flowing font across a sunrise over a green valley carpeted with daffodils. Believe in yourself. Listen to your heart. Life is a journey, not a destination. Follow your dreams. Your dreams. Okay, right. Well, a few nights ago, I dreamt I was on a yellow London bus having a pillow fight with Claudia Winkleman. She was refereed by Noam Chomsky and Will Kirk off of The Repair Shop. How do I follow that dream? And last night, I dreamt that Michael Gove and I... Actually, I'm not going to tell you that one. So, just laying out my stall here, this dull old dignitary standing before you shall not be dispensing inspirational wisdom, although that is something I will certainly undertake to do to the best of my ability with undergraduate drama and comedy groups and others in a more seminar, masterclassy sort of format later this academic term and those following. Is this Hillary, do you call it this term? I didn't go to Oxford. I know. It was just one of those things. It was really unfortunate. But, it was discovered that I was too interesting and clever, and so I had to go to Cambridge. I know. Shush, Stephen, behave yourself. That's childish. But in truth, I do not think that I was offered this distinguished professorship on account of any academic, intellectual, or scholastic attainments. Maybe the whole thing, of course, is a ghastly mistake, and they actually wanted the film director Stephen Frears or the magician Stephen Frayne, aka Dynamo. In any case, I'm here this afternoon, and instead of either stringing motivational pearls of wisdom or expounding scholarly theory, I shall go personal and tell you the story of how I got bitten by language and see where that takes us. Often in life, it isn't what you're good at that springboards you forward. It's what you're bad at. And that applies in my case. Let me explain. When I was 7, I was sent away from home in Norfolk to a boarding school 200 miles away in Gloucestershire. From almost the first day, I was miserably unhappy. Not homesickness or a sense of abandonment, but a rapid and sickening realization that my incompetence at absolutely everything that mattered was going to relegate me to the lists of the unpopular, the ignored, and the insignificant. The most valued attributes at the school were, of course, the sporting ones. If you could run, hit, catch, throw, tackle, dive, you were in. But when a ball came towards me, I would hopelessly clap my hands at it and drop it to a chorus of boos and groans. I couldn't run without colliding with a tree. On a tennis court, I would trip over the white lines. I couldn't swim, let alone dive, nor was I any good at music. I couldn't move to the rhythm, I couldn't sing in tune, play an instrument, even keep time on a tambourine or get a note out of a recorder. I couldn't paint, draw, or colour in without making a mess. What was I good for? Nothing. Life, I saw from an early age, was going to be sad and lonely. And then one day, the music teacher, oddly enough, came into the classroom and chalked up on the blackboard in big capital letters the word orchestra. Underneath, he started writing out woodwind, brass, strings, and so on. I squeaked out excitedly, "Cart horse!" The teacher stopped, He turned round and said, "Silence, Fry." "No, but it says cart horse," I said, exasperated. The letters of the word orchestra had rearranged themselves in my head into the word cart horse, a most basic and unremarkable anagram, in fact. Not that I knew the word then. The teacher frowned and bade me stay behind and tested me on other words to see if I could do the same with them. Anagrams are silly, nerdy, meaningless things, but back then at 7 years old, being vaguely admired or even regarded as slightly interesting for having a facility with them was the first time I'd ever felt that I was of account, that there was something I could do which amused people. Anagrammatizing is not of any use in the world, unless you're showing off at crosswords, Scrabble or Countdown, which is no way to win friends, as you know. In later life, I have occasionally found it handy. I got to know the Apple founder, Steve Jobs, and I remember once in the late 1990s when a new line of PowerBooks was coming out, and I was with him, and I said, "Laptop machines are really interesting," to which he replied, "Duh." No, I said, not the devices themselves. The words, laptop machines, is a perfect anagram, as it happens, of guess what, Steve? I don't fucking know. Apple Macintosh. He stared at me, so I wrote it up on a whiteboard. "You see? You," said Steve, "are fucking weird." I also had the privilege, actually, of getting to know slightly the great actor, Sir Alec Guinness, best known to many as Obi-Wan Kenobi, of course. We would lunch occasionally at his favourite eatery, the grill room of the Connaught Hotel. And I was late once, not my fault, and not something he took very kindly to. He'd been doing the Times crossword, and while he was waiting for me, "Kindly finish it off for me," he said. So I did a few like that, and he looked and congratulated me on my quickly solving the anagram clues. "Well," I said, "for some reason oh, Alec, do you know what? I've just thought of a rather good anagram of your name." "I hope it isn't like the awful one you've given Alan Bates," he said. My nickname for the actor Alan Bates was Anal Beast. No, I said, it's nothing like that. Your name, Alec Guinness, just happens to be a perfect anagram of genuine class." "Good Lord," said Alec. "I shall remember you in my will." Not that he did, because it would have been nice. His 2% share in the Star Wars films cleared nearly £100 million. Anyway, words became my friends, to use that dreadful twee cliche. We could coin the word tweeche, couldn't we? I could weigh them, play with them, juggle them, invert, convert, and subvert them. Anagrams, acrostic, puns, and spoonerisms flowed from me like fresh water from a mountain spring, or, in the opinion of most of my teachers and schoolfellows, like raw sewage from an outflow pipe. With a newly emerging confidence, I also found I could more importantly harness words to tell stories that engaged and diverted the others. After lights out, I would entertain my dormitory with elaborately Gothic tales of horror, blood and severed heads, or wild, surreal, comical fantasies. Point is, had I been any good, any use at all at rugby or cricket, I probably wouldn't have bothered or worked on language. I'd have been too busy practicing spot kicks and cover drives, but instead, language became my thing, my only thing. I used words to get myself out of trouble, which gave me for the first time an element of confidence. I told you I wasn't going to be the old bore who dispenses advice and wisdom, but I will give you for free my technique for disarming and neutralizing bullies, which you're very welcome to use if you need to. I hope you don't. But if someone ever approached me with the intention of laying violent hands on me, I would say, no, don't touch me, don't hit me. If you do, I'll get an erection. Oh, bloody hell. Completely dismantled them. So feel free to use that. If you, with verbal silliness, I could earn laughter, but at least it was the right kind of laughter. No one laughed anymore at my uncoordinated weirdness on the sports field, my unhappy clappy catching, my eyes tight shut swishing of racket and ball. Didn't matter that I still splashed in gasping panic in the swimming pool and fell over my own legs. I had surmounted the dizzy peaks of language. At least I thought I had. I was soon to discover that I wasn't even in the foothills. It fell out like this. At home, one rainy Sunday afternoon during the school holidays, when I was now about 12, I think, I turned on the television. A film was underway, 10 minutes in, so I didn't catch the title. I found myself more and more transfixed by the language. The film was set in the past. It wasn't Shakespeare or Jane Austen, but I couldn't quite place the period. It was very elegant, very charming. But the language, I'd never heard anything like it. It made me almost want to dance, But there was something so joyfully perfect about it, so elegant, so sweetly and swiftly, yet effortlessly delivered. The rhythm and the patterning were divine, a kind of music. At one point, a young man knelt in front of a young woman and said, "I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection." It was as if I'd been punched in the solar plexus. Lines of this dizzying splendor unrolled throughout. I wanted to jump through the screen and join these astonishing people with their perfect command of English, their easy but thrilling eloquence, the grace of their articulation, and their unexampled funniness. The proper word for which I now know to be wit. As soon as it was over, I ran to my mother. "Mummy, Mummy," I cried, "I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite openly and frankly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection." "Darling, what are you talking about?" I described what I'd seen and heard. "Oh," said my mother, "that sounds like Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest." She thought there might be a copy of the play in the house, but we couldn't find it. So never mind, the noble county of Norfolk in those days sent out mobile libraries into the remotest countryside. Ours came every other Thursday to a meeting of lanes not far from the house. So the next appointed day, the great grey van rumbled into my fevered view. The driver stopped, pulled up his handbrake, climbed down onto the road, wheezed round to the side of the van, opened a door, let down some steps, and patted my bottom up into the library. That was all right in those days, you could do it. Sitting behind her counter, the librarian welcomed me aboard a sweet, fluffy old thing in a lemon-coloured cardigan. She had soft, powdery cheeks and half-moon spectacles dangling on a chain. "And what can we do for you, young man? Might you have a copy of The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde?" She pointed, and sure, there enough, low on a shelf, Oscar Wilde, The Four Comedies, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, Lady Vandermeer's Wind, that can't be right, and heaven be praised, The Importance of Being Earnest. She stamped the book out with that springy thump that is heard no more in the world, and I ran panting home, threw myself on the bed and began to read. For 2 weeks, I read that play every day. I learned it by heart. That's not an exaggeration. And it was the language that smote me like a broadside as I lay on the bed rehearsing and reciting the speeches. I saw that language could actually be all the things that I was afraid of and hopeless at. It could be a dance, it could be colour, it could be music, it could be tennis, cricket, football and rugby combined, for words could be served, tossed, spun, splashed, kicked, caught and returned as athletically as any ball. Words could seduce, beguile, dazzle, captivate, amuse, thrill, enrapture, enchant and ensnare. The teasing tingle of the tip of the tongue tripping to the back of the teeth, the swoop from silliness to the sensual and the sublime, the rat-a-tat run of rhythm and participles, prepositions and particles, the climbing climaxes and collapsing cadences, the dizzying dissonance of divergent discourses clanging and clashing, the juicy, generous jazz of it. This is turning into bad Gerald Manley Hopkins, but truly, that was it. It was the generosity of language. When we exchange words every day, we give so little. Pass the mustard. What's the time? That's not the mustard. I hate you. Ipswich Town lost 6-0. Hooray. But Oscar Wilde's language was riotously extra. Its exquisite gravity, control and elegance when expressing frivolous matters like buttonholes and buttered muffins, and its exquisite levity, freedom and ease when expressing supremely serious matters like birth, death, marriage and inheritance, which is what Wilde meant when he said of the play, it teaches us to take the trivial things in life seriously and the serious things in life with a sincere and studied triviality. It's worth diving deep into the sentence that first caught my attention. I hope I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection. There's a deep-seated feeling amongst speakers of English that when we speak from the heart, we favour most especially words in the language that derive from Anglo-Saxon. Such words are plain, stout, upright, worthy, and true, just like that list of adjectives. In the English tongue, not language, we choose the words, not verbiage or vocabulary, of Robin Hood, Falstaff, Toby Belch, fair Saxon yeoman bowmen, blue-eyed utterers of good Saxon oaths, and flaxen-haired scoffers down of good Saxon cakes and ale. On the other side, the Norman Sheriff of Nottingham, Guy of Gisborne, Malvolio, with their lank, black, greasy Severus Snape hair and their long, greasy Latinate words and intricate classical constructions. Americans feel an especial aversion to what they call $10 words. Laconic, monosyllabic heroes, men like Gary Cooper and Clint Eastwood, would never use them. Ernest Hemingway mocked William Faulkner, who, being a Southerner, was not afraid of the profuse. Poor Faulkner, he wrote, does he really think big emotions come from big words? I know them all right, but there are older and simpler and better words, and those are the ones I use. The plain, honest citizen leaves the spraying of Latinate patter and the decorative folderols and curlicues to snake oil salesmen and politicians. Language derived from Latin and Greek is the language of sneaky evasion and pretension, or of complex systems, science, technology, mathematics, and all those ologies. So when we drop to one knee and utter words of love, we do not descend into that kind of talk. We go all Saxon and we say, I love you. You turn me on, you thrill me. Wow, you're hot. Kiss me till I scream. You're lovelier than a lullaby. Girl, you're gorgeous. Boy, you're so handsome. Let's do it. Let's fall in love. All Saxon. We do not, as Algernon in the play does, tell the beloved Cicely that they are the visible personification of absolute perfection. If you have to take time to craft so elegant a formulation, architecturally a classical Georgian square of a sentence, rather than a village green, a shaggy country lane, or a lonesome western trail, then surely you're being led by the head, not by the heart, and you cannot truly be in love. Or to change metaphors, Algernon is presenting not a wild rose plucked from an English hedgerow, but a carefully bred hothouse orchid, which is to us so much less romantic. And yet, of course, the joke returns on itself, because who could not be dazzled and enchanted by such exquisite phrasing? To kneel before someone and give them that. It's absurd and it's funny, but it's also head-spinningly seductive and charming. And Algernon's words, more than anything else, are original. Clichés come by way of other people, of course, and are worth little. An original phrase, even a preposterously overdone Latinate phrase, is worth so much more, perhaps especially a phrase so overdone. Well, I could go on and on in silly circles trying to understand why that dialogue struck me amidships the way it did and how it works. The point is, I, like Cicely Cardew, the object of Algernon's affections, was entirely seduced. But mostly it was the delicious laughter and stunned pleasure it aroused, how it worked as what Germans call ein Schenkelklopfer, the kind of moment that makes you want to slap your knee in delight. The wit and linguistic brilliance of the importance was more, though, than a gateway drug to a lifelong obsession with language. It changed everything about me. 2 weeks after reading his plays, I ran back to the meeting of the Lanes and awaited the mobile library once more. Please, I said to the librarian, what else have you got by this Oscar Wilde? I came home clutching the complete works, which I read in a giddy fever of delight. The more political and philosophical essays and dialogues were somewhat beyond me, but the fairy tales and stories like Lord Arthur Savile's Crime and, of course, the picture of Dorian Gray captivated me entirely. So back I went to the mobile library 2 weeks later to return the book. More from Oscar Wilde, I panted. Well, said the librarian, quite reasonably, if that's called the complete works, then there won't be any more, will there? I mooched around the interior of the van, disappointed that I had sucked Oscar's peach dry, when I saw the spine of a book with a most surprising title, The Trials of Oscar Wilde by one H. Montgomery Hyde. Trials? Had this Oscar Wilde led a life of trials and tribulations? I took it home to read. I learned at first what a remarkable man he was, how he attracted a marvelous circle of friends, how kind and funny and extraordinary he was in every way. And then a dark note entered the story. His tempestuous lover, Lord Alfred Douglas, known as Bosie, whose father, the Marquis of Queensberry, pursued and harried him. The impetuous decision to sue Queensberry. The rent boys and chambermaids produced as witnesses by Queensberry's lawyer. The collapse of that civil trial. The arrest at the Cadogan Hotel. And Betjeman's poetic dramatization of that scene. Mr. Wilde, we have come for to take you where felons and criminals dwell. We must ask you to come with us quietly, for this is the Cadogan Hotel. The production of more witnesses to prove that he had led a life that to the Victorians was entirely degraded, perverted, and debauched. A hung jury, and then a third trial. This is the worst case I have ever tried. The words of Lord Justice Wills, who sent him down for 2 years at hard labour, a punishment someone of Wilde's class and upbringing was not expected to survive. The unspeakable pain and suffering of Reading Gaol, the great lord of language, now ranked lower in the public's mind than the thieves and murderers around him. The miserable and squalid exile in Paris, a painful death at the age of just 46. I read all this with my heart in my mouth, mad with pity and terror. I'm sorry to say, not so much pity and terror for Oscar Wilde as for myself, because the crime, the sin, the great transgression for which Wilde had been felled was his, we would use the word sexuality now, I suppose, but let's use the word he used instead, his nature. I knew then as a frightened child on the edge of adolescence that this was a nature that I shared. How long had I known? From the very first, I think. I like to say that the moment I was born, when I looked back up and said, that's the last time I'm going up one of those. But in truth, reading of Wilde's awful fate, I could only panic at the thought of what mine might be, a life of fear, shame, mockery, secrecy, and lonely exile. This propelled me to the main library in Norwich, to the catalogue cards, the equivalent of today's live web links from which to jump from book to book via bibliographies and academic and anecdotal mentions. I chased down everything I could on what we would now call, I suppose, queer literature, to convince myself that I wasn't alone, to find out if my life might have a future of any kind, to learn about fine souls and strong spirits who shared mine and Oscar's nature. I uncovered a world history of artists and writers: Somerset Maugham, E.M. Forster, Rattigan Coward, Cole Porter, Baron Corvo, Jean Genet, Lorca, Auden and Isherwood, James Baldwin, Tennessee Williams, Gore Vidal, Lawrence Hart, John Rechy, Gertrude Stein, Radcliffe Hall, Mary Renault, Marcel Proust, Roger Périfide, Jean Genet again for some reason, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Caravaggio. I leapt from one to the other like an ibex of the Pyrenees springing from crag to crag. That one stone thrown into the Oscar pond led me to the separate and overlapping ripples of artistic and bohemian friendship circles, schools and groups, many of whose members were hetero, of course, most in fact. And this whole obsessive routine of my teenage years, sitting in the library, hungrily seeking affirmation, vindication, and assurance, it gave me, almost by mistake, an education and a hunger for writing and art beyond the narrower confines of my nature, for all creative callings, an education that no school or college could ever impart or be expected to impart. It was one thing for me to read and revel in the language, passion, defiance, and courage of these writers. But of course, just as some of my friends who fell in love with Jimi Hendrix or Led Zeppelin wanted to learn guitar chords and make their own music, so I wanted to make my own writing. Poems, stories, and the opening chapters of 100 novels streamed from me. I couldn't show them to anyone, of course, not because of their subject matter, but because as much as I had been enraptured by Oscar's language, I had been hobbled by it, lamed by it too. Do you know that Kipling poem, The Conundrum of the Workshop? It's a refashioning of the Genesis creation myth. In Kipling's Eden, Satan doesn't bother himself with the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. Instead, when Adam, with a stick in the dirt, makes the world's first drawing and stands proudly back to admire it, the devil whispers in his ear the dreadful words, "It's pretty, but is it art?" The devil whispered a similar thing in my ear whenever I finished a piece of writing. "It's pretty, but is it you? Is it you?" I didn't know much, but I knew enough to know that artists and writers must have an individual style, a voice, a tone and manner all of their own, as recognizable as the human face, figure, or gait. It could be florid and juicy, like Dickens, plain and unadorned, like Hemingway, or stylishly styleless, like Orwell. But you had to have one of your own. A borrowed style was as bad as a borrowed phrase, a cliche, and cliches, as the old joke has it, should be avoided like the plague. I did have a style, but it was an embarrassingly mannered and self-conscious mishmash of my www, my world writing web, P.G. Wodehouse, Oscar Wilde, and Evelyn Waugh, with a bit of Conan Doyle, Saki, and Ronald Furbank thrown in for seasoning. Not a personal, original idiolect, but a magpie's nest of epithets, figures, rhythms, and tropes, each glittering trinket held up in my beak to be admired, but each pilfered, lifted wholesale, or clumsily repurposed. Just as adolescents adopt the fashion style of someone they admire, knotting a scarf this way or that, adopting a donkey jacket one day, an army surplus greatcoat the next, not lacing the shoes, rolling up one sleeve but not the other, so I had thrown on any which way the writing styles of my heroes. I was nothing but a fake, layers of artifice, masks, and disguises. So self-conscious. I was doubly self-conscious, in fact, self-conscious about my self-consciousness. This anxiety, actually a better word for it is probably embarrassment, this embarrassment about the private world of my writing sat atop the usual adolescent anxieties and embarrassments of appearance, desirability, accent, that, had I known it, everyone my age shared, despite the confident figures they appeared to cut. So where or what was my real self? My hero, Oscar Wilde, had written, "Most people are other people. Their thoughts are other people's opinions, their lives a mimicry, their passions a quotation." It's a hard thing to read, that, isn't it? I didn't want to be most people, but I knew that I was. Then this thought occurred to me. When you're young, you often practice writing your name, don't you? In my case, I remember changing it several times throughout my teenage years, my signature, making the Y of Fry a straight-down descender without a hook, doing a backwards F, underlining with a flourish, then abandoning the underline. I practiced versions endlessly. It was always a work in progress, a consciously designed autograph that, like teenagers everywhere, I wrote in books, followed by the long address that ends the solar system, the Milky Way, the universe, etc. Though in my case, I would put the case, because Wittgenstein had written that the universe is everything that is the case, and because I was a wanker. But somewhere along the line, it more or less, my signature, settled into the shape it is now. It absolutely became my signature. A bank's graphologist would have accepted it on a check or counterfoil. It was me. And that, surely, I reasoned, is how everybody's signature becomes theirs. And this must be true just as surely of all the other more complex elements of personality, mode, manner, and style that I put together over the years of my youth. My walk, the way I held books in front of me rather than under my arm, the woolen charity shop ties and mustard-coloured waistcoats I favoured, the brand of cigarette that I smoked, all chosen for pretentious, vain, silly reasons, no doubt, that the day came when they were somehow who I was. They were me, my look, myself. There was no real face behind the mask, because the mask was the real face. Le style, c'est l'homme, as Buffon taught us. So let's return to my biographical timeline very quickly. Somehow, at the age of 17, I ended up in prison and then served 2 years probation. I shan't go into the details. The whole sordid yet romantic and inspiringly heroic tale is thrillingly told in my first volume of incomparable memoirs, which are even now nestling on a shelf in Blackwell's awaiting your pleasure. But at any rate, somehow I, to misappropriate Alfred Tennyson, rose on the stepping stones of my dead self to higher things, and I won myself a place at that university, the other side of London, the university that should not be named. I used to write articles and reviews for some of the student journals and news sheets that proliferated at the University of Voldemort. In one of them, it was the practice for all the articles to go without the contributors' names attached. Everything was anonymous, so the readers never knew who submitted which article. And one day, someone came up to me in the street and said, "You wrote that review of The Merchant of Venice, didn't you?" "How could you possibly know that?" I said, astonished. "Oh, to be stupid. It was you all over. No one else could have written that." I went back to my rooms in a complete daze. It seemed I had a style, a discernible manner, all my own, recognizable. But still, I asked myself, was I any better than a magpie, a thief, anyone with true literary insight? Surely could see that my voice was just a salmagundi, a fricassee, a minestrone, a Haribo star mix of other better originals, not a single pure, authentic voice. In the end, I adopted the aesthete's view that actually the formation of self-identity can be regarded as a kind of artistic act, and the obvious, if elusive, idea came to me that everybody's style, manner, and persona are created over time and from all kinds of borrowed elements, and that this must most especially be true in the field of language. We learn to write by copying the letter shapes of the teacher or the exercise book. They are not our own formations. Nonetheless, fairly soon, as we saw with the signature, it all somehow becomes our handwriting. Nor are the very words themselves that we write down or utter in speech original to us. If they were as unique as an artist's brushstrokes or a musician's melodies, we couldn't use language the way we commonly do. If this lecture were not composed of words that you all know, then Fledwell and Mamble-Prips Boggity Whittlesey. But, I concluded, at least I did have a style. And I've had it ever since. A style that can easily be looked down upon by myself as much as anyone else. But to change it would surely be impossible now. When I was a pliable greenstick sapling, anything was achievable. But I'm gnarled into tough fibre these days, and nothing will give without snapping. Once springy and swingy, now dignified and lignified. If I tried to talk like a Hemingway hero, for example, I'd be a greater fraud than when I hide myself behind flurries of fancy formulations and alluring alliterations. But, and it's a hell of a but, I've been complimented on it, but no, shut up. Yes, you see, but my high doctrine of language, my love of phonology, philology, and wordplay, and the heaping of phrases one on top of the other, if that is a style, is it not one that occludes truthfulness? Wasn't Mark Twain right to express what he called a natural and justifiable distrust of those who hide behind a new and bewitching rainbow explosion of fine language? Haven't I turned myself into nothing more than a verbal dandy, an Algernon? Fine phrases may ripple from me, but don't they obscure, deflect, and distort? The lure of language is a siren, a snare. What the devil now whispers in my ear is, it's pretty, but is it true? Well, let us accept that the way we deploy words is an aesthetic, which might be made clearer if I make the point in the sphere of painting. I love Vermeer. Who does not? The recent Amsterdam show of his works was the most popular and oversubscribed art exhibition in history. His style, almost photographic in its realism. You can detect a brushstroke and the application of paint on the surface of a Vermeer canvas, but to do so, you will have to get closer than museum security would allow. Nothing seems to become between you standing before the picture and the world that Vermeer has painted. Vermeer himself is apparently absent, as is evidence of his process. On the other hand, another Dutchman, also beginning with V, Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh, if there are any Dutch people here, emphatically does not hide the paint. Indeed, it is applied with such fulsome generosity that it even casts shadows. You can almost hear it. In one famous case, it's been smeared on with a lively enough urgency for him apparently not to have noticed a grasshopper getting itself embedded in the paint, in which it is now permanently preserved. Is Van Gogh less truthful in what he depicts than Vermeer? Do the profusion and painterliness get in the way? Not in the least. It's simply a different aesthetic. They both give you truth. They are both obsessed with giving you truth. And realism does it in one way, and the style of Van Gogh, the painterliness, does it in another. They both reach the truth of what they're painting. And in writing, well, we can have Hemingway and Faulkner after all. It isn't a zero-sum game. And after all, also, to be cheap and shallow, they both won Nobel Prizes. Let's return to Oscar. In a letter composed in the pain and misery of his cell in Reading Jail, he reproached Bosie Douglas, amongst other things, for his failure to make anything of his time here in Oxford as a student, an undergraduate. It was nothing to do with Bosie failing to get a good degree, he wrote, but rather, you had not been able to acquire the Oxford temper in intellectual matters. Never, I mean, been one who could play gracefully with ideas, but had arrived at violence of opinion merely. There now, the Oxford temper, the ability to play gracefully with ideas, which can only be done through language, of course. Do you Oxonians of today have that ability? I'm sure you do. To play, not fight, argue, reason, wrangle, insist or demand, but to play, and gracefully at that. Wilde comes over now as a prophet denouncing almost all of us. For like Bosie, aren't most of us in our world wholly and disastrously lacking in the ability to play gracefully with words and therefore ideas? And is not violence of opinion merely our most likely manner today, our predominant temper? G.K. Chesterton said, "Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly." With the heaviness of today's discourse, is it any wonder we can't get off the ground? So here is my trumpet call, if I can be so bold. Let's indeed play. As far as the aesthetics of language expression are concerned, the last century, the 20th, was the century of the plain voice, the not a wasted word voice, the journalistic voice, the recording voice. Dickens became uncool, and Hemingway and Orwell reigned over all. I love Hemingway and Orwell, just as I love Vermeer, but not at the expense of exuberant verbalists who lay the words on as Van Gogh laid on paint. Creation, as I say, should not be a zero-sum game. You can have both aesthetics. But let's declare that the years of distrusting flowery Mandarin profusion and approving only of bare, straight rows of functional words should end. Horticulturally, we are encouraged to rewild our gardens and fields, dig up the lawns, sow wild flowers, to let our hedges go without haircuts, and to encourage the bursting forth of colour and growth. So let's set our word gardens free too. Did I really say word gardens? I'm so sorry. But truly, let's reclaim the fun and frolic of language. Let's release it from the lantern-jawed severity and affectless restraint, from austere solemnity. Here's to an individual way with language. Embarrassing, overdone, overseasoned, overspiced, borrowed, cannibalized, veneered, finessed, faked, and finagled as it may be. Let there be freedom in your utterance, and let there be delight. Let there be textural pleasure. Let there be silken words and flinty words, and sodden speeches and soaking speeches, crackling utterance, and utterance that quivers and wobbles like rennet. Let there be rapid firecracker phrases and words that ooze like a lake of lava. Don't rein it in. Don't fear it. Don't believe it belongs to anybody else. Don't let anyone bully you into believing that there are rules and secrets of grammar and verbal deployment to which you are not privy. Just let the words fly from your lips and your pen. Make up silly nicknames for those you love and those you despise. Devise nonsense words and mad melodious mantras. Don't sing in the shower. Try out accents, argos, nonsense, tommyrot and gibberish. Give your words rhythm and depth and height and silliness. Give them filth and form and majestic stupidity. Mix the slangy with the grand, the noble with the naughty. Swear sweetly and curse caressingly. Truth is constructed, aesthetes teach us, through artifice. We can believe in the truth of masks. Reality cannot be trusted. Appearances can. Reality is shifting, obscure, and unreliable. Building palaces of gorgeous coloured words is an act of belief, a gift that proclaims us all worthy of palaces. Towers of grey breeze-block words insult our capacity for language and deny us the thrones in the realm of language that are our birthright. Demagogues use words to blame, enrage, divide, and inflame. Can we not venture to use them to enchant, connect, solace, and inspire? Words are free, and all words, light and frothy, dour and dappled, firm and sculpted as they may be, bear the history of their passage from lip to lip over thousands of years. Words are weaponry and witchcraft. They are pedigrees and passports, crowns and costume, and they are ours. Succumb to their lure. Buff their current dullness to a dazzling new shine, sheen, and gleam. Play gracefully. Disport yourselves disgracefully, and make Oscar proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I think you can see from that response just how inspirational that lecture was. A really fascinating, wide-ranging, stylish, and personal account of your journey, which I think we all found so interesting and so inspirational. That call to linguistic joy and wordplay at the end. And I think it's a good thing that Oxford has so many libraries, because I feel that there will be a huge demand on the works of Oscar Wilde following this following this lecture. And I was glad to hear that Chomsky got a mention, but I'm not sure that story of the pillow fight in the London bus is one I can use myself. But thank you. It's been really wonderful, and we're just extremely grateful to you for taking this time in your busy schedule to come and speak to us and to be the News UK Visiting Professor of Creative Media. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Sir Stephen again for a really wonderful talk.
Very sweet.